All right, it's 2 minutes past 3, so we'll get going with the webinar. Thank you all for making time to attend our second webinar on part 2 of the two-part series on judicial decisions. Thank you. My name is Anthony Alex, and today we will be discussing 3 important cases that have sort of been, that are, worthy of discussing for everything related to the POSH Act and the POSH law in general. So as some of you may remember, a couple of weeks ago, we had the first part, and today we are going to complete the second part. We're going to kick it off with an important case, Anita Suresh versus Union of India and others. Important because this deals with false complaint or filing of false complaints, and this was a very interesting judgment actually. So we thought this would be the first case we'd pick up in this series, and we also got feedback from our last session that I think a couple of you felt that they'd like us to discuss a case that dealt with a false complaint. So we heard you, and today's the first case, the Anita Suresh case, is specifically with respect to false complaints. Well, this is the closest we have got to a decision on false complaints in terms of a senior or a high court that has heard the matter. So let's dive straight in. Anita Suresh versus Union of India. This case pertained to the complaint. The facts were as follows. The complainant was working with the ESI Corporation in Gurgaon. She filed a complaint with her internal committee alleging that the respondent had made sexual advances towards her in the presence of other colleagues. The complainant alleged that the respondent had asked her to come along to the male toilet to check the shortcomings when nobody else was around, right? The IC conducted an examination, and they asked the complainant to actually provide the names of the witnesses who she had, because the complainant had said that this incident happened in front of a number of her colleagues. So the IC asked her, can you sort of name the colleagues who were there so that they could independently verify this case separately with them, right? So the complainant during examination was not able to recollect the names of the persons present at the time of the incidents, despite being shown the relevant papers relating to the staff members who present on that day of the incident, right? So the IC actually told her, listen, these are the staff members who were present on this day. Can you now go through this and tell us who you think was present when the respondent allegedly behaved in an inappropriate manner? She was not able to do that. So she was not able to produce a single witness, despite her own claim that this entire sort of harassment happened in the presence of her colleagues. The IC therefore dismissed her complaint, and dismissed the case against the respondent. So the respondent was found not guilty, and the case was closed. The complainant then subsequently filed a complaint before the Delhi High Court, and where she challenged the order of the IC, right? So these are the facts of this case in brief. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So the Delhi High Court heard the matter, and here's how they decided the matter. And there are, so if you read up a little bit on this matter, there's a lot of chatter and discussion about whether the court actually did the right thing in this instance or not, right? But let's go for the judgment order of this court. So the Delhi High Court, a single judge of the Delhi High Court, observed that it was hard to believe that the complainant could not remember the names of any colleague or staff member who had witnessed the alleged events, given the sheer nature of the offense, right? So given the seriousness of the offense, given the fact that the complainant is saying she was humiliated in front of her colleagues, the fact that she could not remember or recollect the name of even a single witness was viewed very seriously by the Delhi High Court, right? The High Court noted that the IC had examined all the relevant persons on duty on the day of the incident. So the IC had spoken to every single person who was on duty as per the roles or the attendance sheet, and asked them, had they heard or seen the respondent behave in an inappropriate manner as described by the complainant. Not a single one of them supported the claims of the complainant, right? Thereafter, the court also added that the complainant at no point had specified or provided any details of the comments before the IC. So the details of the comments was not provided to the IC at any point of time by the complainant. So the High Court termed the complaint filed by the complainant to be false and to have been filed with an ulterior motive to defame the respondent, right? So the High Court felt that in view of these circumstances, they felt that the complaint was actually a false and malicious complaint and dismissed with the objective of defaming the respondent, and they dismissed the petition by ordering the complainant to pay 50,000 to a welfare trust as penalty for filing a false complaint. So if you all recollect, the POSH law 2013 actually says that the penalty or the penal consequences of filing a false complaint is as severe as it were if one had filed one had been guilty of sexual harassment. And so the Delhi High Court therefore decided to sort of levy a penalty of 50,000 rupees on this lady for having filed a false complaint, right? So this is, I mean, we talk a lot about, a lot of the webinars, a lot of the workshops that I conduct. It always comes up, what about a false complaint? How many false complaints have you seen, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one of the very, very few judicial decisions at the level of the High Court that you will find where they have actually gone into a false complaint and they have actually adjudicated that this was a false complaint. So what are the takeaways? In cases where the IC concludes that the complaint is filed as false and malicious, it can find the complainant. So that is exactly as per the POSH law. Now remember this, that in this case, though the IC did not find it to be a false or malicious complaint, the High Court did. The IC had simply dismissed the matter, right? But the High Court, upon hearing the facts and looking at the order of the IC, came to the conclusion that it was a false and malicious complaint. So, and as you know, the POSH Act provides for the same penalty in case of a false complaint as in the case of sexual harassment. So in this particular case, the complainant was fined 50,000 rupees as a punishment for filing a false or a malicious complaint, right? A complaint with which the complainant knew full well at the time of filing it to be false, right? So that is the Anita Suresh case. It is oft cited by trainers, legal experts, etc., to kind of as one of the cases with respect to a false complaint. There are to play devil's advocate, there are some legal experts who feel that it was very harsh of the High Court to have sort of penalized the lady in terms of calling it a false complaint. There are many who feel it should have been just simply dismissed. The case against the respondent should have simply been dismissed, and that would have been the end of it. But there are always two ways to look at an order. This one dealt with a false complaint, and this is how the complaint finally landed up, right? We can take questions at the end of the session, but this was the Anita Suresh false complaint scenario. Okay. So the next case, I see some of you are raising your hands, and I think there's a question as well, but please bear with me. We will take your questions at the end of the session, right? So let's just go through all three cases, and then at the end of the three cases, we can take questions on each of those cases if you'd like. So when you're asking your question, please remember the case that you want to ask with reference to, and we can discuss that. All right. So the next case is the Usha Padmini case, Usha Padmini versus State of Karnataka and others. It's a Karnataka High Court single judge decision. So in this, the facts were as follows. The complainant and the respondent were both working at Alcatel-Lucent Technologies. The respondent was a reporting authority or manager of the complainant. The complainant filed a complaint with the IC alleging that the respondent had been sexually harassing her by sitting inappropriately in front of her and on occasions standing too close to her. So the allegations really were twofold. One is sort of sitting inappropriately, and the other was to stand very, very close to the complainant. The IC completed the inquiry, but they absolved the respondent of all charges, right? So the respondent was found not guilty in the report that they submitted to HR. Post the IC's mandate or the order, the company terminated the services of the complainant, right? So the IC found the respondent to be not guilty, and post the order or post completion of this matter, the IC also terminated the complainant's order, complainant's employment. The complainant filed a criminal complaint, following which a charge sheet was filed against respondents under Section 354A, 504, read with Section 34 of the IPC. Essentially, sexual harassment as a criminal offense, right? The complainant also challenged the order of the IC before the High Court and the Supreme Court, right, where the petitions were dismissed on the grounds of non-maintainability, which basically means that both the High Court and the Supreme Court refused to accept the appeal filed by the lady with respect to the IC's order. Now, why this case is important? If it was just relating to that particular matter where it went with respect to the challenge of the IC's order, it would have been fine, may not have necessarily been a case that we would be discussing here today. Why this order is important is as follows, right? The Karnataka High Court placed reliance on the Supreme Court's judgment of Radheshyam Kejriwal versus State of West Bengal, which states that in a case where following an inquiry, the respondent has been absolved of all charges, a separate criminal prosecution on the same set of facts and evidence cannot be allowed. Therefore, what the Supreme Court had said in that case is that if there was in a separate civil proceeding, the case that has been charged against somebody and has been dismissed, then on the same set of facts, one cannot file a criminal complaint. So this was the Supreme Court order that the Karnataka High Court relied on, right? The High Court held that the IC's inquiry was concerning the same allegations made again in the form of criminal prosecution under 354A of the IPC. So therefore, IC's view was that since the the High Court's view was that since the IC has already heard the matter and dismissed the complaint against the respondent, on the same set of facts, a criminal case cannot be made out under 354A. So if there was a twist or there was some additional information, then maybe this would not have been the case. But the set of facts were exactly the same as they were placed before the internal committee. The court noted that the material relied on by the IC and the investigating agency is the same, and that the complainant had not produced any additional material to substantiate the said charges, right? So you understand where this is going. So if on the same set of facts, a fresh complaint or a criminal complaint is filed, it is likely to be dismissed. It was observed that after having the IC already inquire into the very same allegations and having found no truth or substance in the said allegations, prosecution of the respondent for the very same violation on the very same set of evidence would be an unjust and an abuse of the process of the court. Essentially, you can't use the same set of facts to then first file an IC complaint, then go to the criminal complaint, right? The court believed that under the said circumstances, to secure the ends of justice, it would be necessary and expedient to quash the proceedings initiated against the respondent. The proceedings initiated against the respondent for the offences punishable under sections 354A, 504, read with 34 of the IPC were hence quashed, which means the court completely quashed the proceedings, and therefore the criminal proceedings completely came to a standstill, right? So that's so the situation so far. The IC has dismissed the matter. The civil case is closed because in appeal, when it went to appeal, the High Court did not held that suit was not maintainable. So no appeal at the High Court, no appeal at the Supreme Court in the civil case. She also parallelly filed a criminal case, which was filed after the IC's order on the same set of facts, on the same evidence. That was squashed by the High Court, saying that it cannot be maintained. And there is a Supreme Court ruling on this that the High Court has used to justify its order. So that's essentially the Usha Padmini order. So what are the key takeaways here? One, if the respondent, following an inquiry, has been exonerated by the IC of all charges and been declared as innocent, a criminal charge with the same set of facts and evidence will not be held valid in the eyes of the law, right? So if a respondent has been held not guilty by the internal committee on a set of facts, you cannot file on the same set of facts a criminal case, right? The aggrieved woman or the complainant may approach the appropriate forum in case of a grievance, but at the same time cannot be allowed to forum hunt for favorable relief. So the court viewed this as forum hunting, right? They said that, look, you went to the IC, you didn't get relief, you appealed to the High Court, you went to the Supreme Court, no relief there. Under those circumstances, to again take the case to the criminal court would be non-maintainable, right? So that is how the court ruled in this case. This judgment reinforces the importance of the IC inquiry process and the subsequent order. Very, very important for all of us to appreciate and understand, especially those of us who are members of an internal committee. You have a very important role to play and a job to sort of do, which is ensuring that justice is done. Because on the basis of your order, either the complainant or respondent, the next steps that they may take in the legal process, really a lot of it depends on your order. And the IC's order is really a trial court's order. Higher courts view it as a trial court's order and give it that sort of respect and importance, right? So many times decisions of the passed by the internal committee are not challenged or not sort of overturned or overruled by an IC, by a higher court, simply because they view this as an order of a trial court that has gone into great detail to establish or understand the facts of that case. And so that's why it's very important that the IC follows the principles of natural justice, follows good due process, and passes an order that is appropriate, right? So that's the Usha Padmini case. And the last case that we're going to sort of dive into before we close out all three cases is the Union of India and others versus Rema Srinivas Iyengar. This is hot off the shelf, if you will. It's a brand new order. It's just come maybe weeks ago, passed by Madras High Court and a division bench. If you notice, the first two orders were passed by a single judge, but this is passed by a division bench, two judges sitting in a division bench. So that's this particular order. Now let's look at this particular case, the Rema Srinivas Iyengar case. So the complainant in this case had filed a case against a superior officer, right? Sorry, I think my charge is running out, so let me put on my, yeah. So in this particular case, the complainant had filed a case against a superior officer, the respondent, with the Registrar and Controller General of the Trademarks and GI and Patents and Design, right? The complainant claimed to be aggrieved by the high-handedness of the respondent and the harm that it had caused to her self-respect due to his arrogant behavior, okay? The registrar constituted an IC to look into the complaint filed by the complainant. Subsequently, the complainant filed another complaint highlighting other incidents involving the rude behavior of the respondent. Okay, so far, you're not seeing any, there is no sexual aspect to the complaint. The complainant then wrote a letter to the Tamil Nadu State Commission for Women, stating her apprehension that the IC would not render justice to her, since all IC members were subordinate to the respondent, and therefore her complaint should be referred to the local committee. The letter had a different set of facts compared to the original complaint, which had been filed before the IC, suddenly mentioning several advances and instances of sexual harassment. So what the complainant has done here is she has written to the Tamil Nadu State Commission for Women stating that she was worried about not getting justice. Why? Because the registrar, naturally every member of the IC reported into the registrar, and therefore she felt that she would not get justice with this IC. Now remember, I want to also remind all of you that the POSH law has a specific provision which says that if the complaint is against the sort of employer, then in that case, the complaint has to be with the local committee. So she's sort of justified in asking the local committee to hear her complaint, right? However, in the complaint before the local committee, you will note that now the facts are a different set of facts, and now she's alleging sexual harassment. The local committee constituted a committee that looked into the alleged grievances of the complainant and recommended an immediate detailed departmental inquiry against the respondent by his employer. The complainant also approached the Central Administrative Tribunal, CAT, stating that she had no faith in the IC of a company. So basically, the complainant is now filing complaints left, right, and center in multiple fora. The CAT held that the local committee had already conducted a preliminary inquiry and that the IC formed by the employer is against the law due to the sole reason that the respondent himself was the head of the department, right? And therefore, all the people who were on the committee were junior to this particular individual. Therefore, a complaint against him can be inquired into only by the local committee. The decision of the tribunal, the CAT, was challenged before the Madras High Court by the respondent. So you can see that the respondent, in this case, the respondent was unhappy with the order of the tribunal, and therefore he filed an appeal to the Madras High Court, which went to the division bench of the Madras High Court, right? So what did the court hold in this particular case? The Madras High Court came down heavily on the complainant and opined that the complaint filed by her lacked details of the alleged incidents and was too generic. So if you remember the first part of what we discussed, the details, it did not contain details with respect to the sexual harassment that a complainant had suffered. The High Court observed that how the complainant had gone about the routine of filing several complaints appeared to be an afterthought, which means maybe to kind of use language from the previous judgment, it may well be that the court thought this was kind of like forum shopping, writing to different sort of entities, right? It was opined that the local committee had given an erroneous decision via a non-speaking ex parte order. So in this case, this is a fairly tangled, complicated case. But in this case, what had happened was that the local committee had asked the respondent to appear before it, but apparently it had only given it one opportunity to appear before it, and then thereafter proceeded to file an ex parte order. Now, as under the POSH law, at least 3 opportunities have to be given to either party to appear before either the IC or the LC before you can dismiss the order. Now, because of this, having only given one opportunity to the respondent to sort of appear before it, they felt that principles of natural justice had not been followed, right? So the High Court observed that on appearance, it seemed as though the complainant had made a futile attempt at settling her scores with the respondent. So it looked to the High Court, it appeared that the complainant was trying to settle scores with the respondent. The judgment laid down that a single allegation of intemperate language against a female employee does not constitute an offense under the POSH Act. So essentially, it boiled down to the fact that the High Court viewed this as bad, basically rude language or intemperate language or inappropriate, sort of the way the conversation went, or maybe the manager shouted or what have you. But that was not enough to constitute an offense under the POSH law. What happened was that it basically, you can have departmental inquiries, you can take it up with a different, maybe a tribunal could have heard into it, what have you. It is an HR issue essentially, but it's not a POSH issue. The court held that every office has to maintain a certain decorum, and women employees cannot be allowed to go scot-free without completing their assignments. The administrative head or chief has every right to extract work and has his or her own discretion and prerogatives. So the court is basically saying that this is now boiling down to the head of the department is being allowed to do whatever he or she needs to do to get the job done, right? So the court does not feel that there is anything, it's not a posh issue. Actually, the court also does not even feel that it's an HR issue. It just feels that if the head of a department or a company is not given a free hand to get the job done, then work is going to suffer. And hence, they felt that it was a case of a departmental head just trying to get the work done from a subordinate. So, if a woman employee is discriminated against due to her inefficiency or for any other official reasons, the recourse for her is not the one taken by the complainant of this case, which means you cannot file a posh complaint just because you're aggrieved by the manner in which your supervisor is sort of behaving vis-a-vis you. The court held that even though the POSH Act intends to have equal standing for women in the workplace and to have a friendly workplace in which their dignity and self-respect are protected, it cannot be misused by women to harass someone with exaggerated or non-existent allegations, right? So the court was very, very clear that the POSH Act has a specific it has been enacted for a specific purpose and it cannot be misused. The court viewed this as a misuse of the POSH law. The High Court therefore quashed the charges and the ex parte order, which had been passed by the LC against the respondent and exonerated him of all charges, right? So that is basically what the court did in this particular case. They essentially took all charges away, dismissed all charges against the respondent and held that a manager or a head of department or the chief of a company or what have you has the right to maybe even use inappropriate language as long as it's not sexual, but language that could be rude or demeaning, because he or she was allowed to do that to get the job done, and that people should not use this as an opportunity to file complaints of sexual harassment. So that is basically the Rama Srinivas Iyengar case. Very important case because it's a division bench. 2 judges of Madras High Court have heard and provided this judgment in this matter. So what's a key takeaway? Pulling up an employee for completion of work and trying to get them to finish the assigned work cannot be termed as sexual harassment. Usage of one intemperate language cannot come under the purview of the POSH Act. Essentially, speaking badly, maybe I would say even not just one, maybe speaking badly twice or thrice also, as long as there is no sexual intent, or if it is not a retaliation for previously sought sexual favors, in which case that would amount to retaliation, then it would not amount to an offense under the POSH law, right? So this is also a very important case that was recently decided and something that we thought would be useful to share with all of you. All right, so that brings us to an end of today's session. It's a short one. We wanted to just basically share these cases with you. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the questions that have popped up. I'll take some of those questions and then we can sort of move on. So, sorry, I'm just seeing what are the questions. Then what can the complainant do if she wants to challenge the IC's verdict? It's an anonymous attendee, so there's no name. And challenge the verdict by going to a higher court. So you can go to the appellate authority, which is typically the labor tribunal in your jurisdiction. You can go to the High Court, and from there you can also go to the Supreme Court. So you have exhaust the appellate process because that is really what what the law prescribes for the complainant. Okay, Khushbu Advocate is asking, I have a question in relation to the POSH Act. What happens when the company has no female employee at all? What is an alternative the company has? Well, look, if the company has no female employees, I would say that the company needs to improve its diversity score, definitely, and hire more women. But that said, if the company has more than 10 employees, then it will still need to comply with the POSH law. The POSH Act does not distinguish between, the only distinction it makes is whether you have 10 employees or more. If you have 10 or more, you have to comply with the law. If you don't have 10, then you don't have to sort of do some of these things that are required under the law, which is setting up of an internal committee and so on and so forth. Malini is asking, sir, I'm a lawyer. I'm an external EC. Do you mean external member in a couple of companies? How can I start my posh law practice? Look, Malini, you first have to familiarize yourself with the law. So get familiar with the law. Read up on the case laws. There's lots of material out there, including what we have put out as Rainmaker. There's lots and lots of material that we have put up on our website. But if you do research, you'll find that there's a lot of materials that a lot of others have also put out there. So go out there, read up, learn, and you will, and then start speaking to organizations. You can start your posh law practice. Priya is asking, the judgment of case 2 was worrying as there is not a remote possibility that the aggrieved party did not get the rightful justice from the IC order. And in all other such cases, if the IC order is not correct true, then what resource does the claimant have? Look, Priya, this is, that's how the judicial process works. So if you are not satisfied with the way with the particular order of a high court or a tribunal, then the only other option for you is to take it up with the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court admits your appeal, great. If not, your legal remedies stand exhausted. That's the way our judicial process is. And that's basically the options that are available to everybody, right? Rahul is saying, in case you had mentioned that under POSH, at least 3 opportunities should be given. Where do we get this from? Rahul, this is there in the POSH rules. So I don't remember the rule number offhand, but it's there in the rules, which specifies that you have to give at least 3 opportunities before you sort of pass an ex parte order. Also, the respondent has to deal with the case as an individual. Why was the Union of India an appellant? Not sure in that particular case why it was an appellant. Let me get back to you on that. Probably because the company was a PSU. That can be the only explanation. Why did the court not consider her sexual harassment? Sumali is asking, why did the court not consider her sexual harassment allegations, even though they were filed later? It's a good question, Sumali. I think the court probably felt that if those allegations were genuine, then the complainant should have filed it at the first instance and not later, and therefore dismiss them outright. In my view, I would say that if you're a complainant, put all your questions out there right up front, right at the first opportunity. Put everything in your complaint, because there is a real possibility that if your questions are kept full, not questions, but your entire complaint with respect to the aspect of sexual harassment are not dealt with in the complaint at the first instance, they may not be accepted at a later point of time. They may be viewed as an afterthought. So it's critical that a complainant puts all the questions out there right at the beginning. Case 3, please explain sexual intent. Khushbu, I'm not sure what your question is about. Neeru, wonderful session, Anthony. Thank you, Neeru. Thank you so much. Swati is asking, how are transgender rights affected by the POSH Act? So the transgender rights, I think, essentially what the Transgender Act allows a transgender, a trans male or a trans woman, trans female, to change their gender through a specified process. So if you change your gender as per the process in the Transgender Act, then you can avail of the remedies under the POSH law. So for example, if you're a trans woman working in an organization and you're being sexually harassed, you can seek recourse under the POSH Act 2013, right? For Usha Padmini case, Neeru's asking, it was wrong termination. What was the judgment on this point? In this particular case, let's just go back to the Usha Padmani judgment. Yeah. So a separate criminal prosecution. I believe that they would have, if it was wrongful termination, they would have reinstated him. That would be what the court would have done in this particular instance. They would have quashed the proceedings and initiated against the respondent. But again, this is a point of detail. So Neeru, I can come back to you on that. But I'm pretty sure that they would have reinstated it if they had viewed this as wrongful termination. So if the Renuka is asking if the organization has 10 employees on paper but 150 professional members, is that what you're asking? I mean, are they consultants? In any case, they would have to comply with the POSH law, Renuka. There's no doubt about it. There's no way to get around the requirement to comply with the POSH law, right? So the last case, was there any penalty for the complainant? Swati is asking, in the Rama Srinivas Iyengar judgment, was there any penalty for the? No. So in this particular case, unlike the previous case, Swati, where it was held to be a false case, in this case, I think what the court has done is that they've merely viewed this as a case that they dismissed the case against the respondent. So he was not held guilty of sexual harassment, but there was no separate proceedings or there was no ruling on the fact that they viewed this to be a false complaint. So Ruchita is asking, can you share the first part? Yes, Ruchita, we will be sharing the recording of this session at a later point of time. The complainant response. How are complaints viewed if the complainant and respondent, Swati Pant is asking, how are complaints viewed if the complainant and respondent had a previous or current romantic or sexual history? Well, look, the fact that two people have been in a romantic or a sexual relationship does not mean that sexual harassment cannot happen. So if at some point of time the relationship has ended, but one of the sort of male partner is continuing to sexually harass the female partner, then it would amount to sexual harassment under the POSH law. That would still remain the same. So that would not change. So Khushbu is asking, presiding officer has to be female and having no female employee makes the procedure of constituting IC difficult. Yes, Khushbu, agreed. And which is the reason why an organization should hire at least one woman to have as a presiding officer in its company. Maybe this is the government's way of forcing gender diversity by saying that even if you don't have any women, you should hire one to ensure that you're in compliance with the law. That said, I should also tell you that the law allows for a company to also get a presiding officer from a sister entity. So if you have another organization that you're affiliated with and they have a presiding officer, then you can ask that person to be the presiding officer on your committee as well. So that can be done. Malini is asking, is Labor Court the first appellate authority? Yes, Malini, that's right. The Labor Court is the appellate authority as notified under the POSH law. So that is the first appellate authority under the law, and then thereafter the High Court and then the Supreme Court. So is there any case where Sanjay is asking where you have seen a higher court penalizing IC members for any violation? Good question, Sanjay, but I don't believe there have been cases where the IC has kind of passed strictures where they have said that we feel that the IC could have handled this in a better manner. The order could have been better written, or even if the principles of natural justice have not been followed, the IC has kind of the higher courts have passed strictures, but no penalty as such. Nothing really that says that you've got to pay a fine or whatever. They still do view this as the IC members doing a duty. So it's not really. I haven't come across any such case in that regard. In today's day and age, Neil is asking of social media. Sorry, 1 second. The case just, yeah. If the cases are deemed as false in the eyes of the law and the person filing the false complaint goes onto social media to gain an edge and defame the name of the so-called harasser, is there any retributive action taken? Well, look, the law does say, Neil, that it's got to, confidentiality has to be maintained. So that cannot be compromised under any circumstances, right? So taking that sort of aspect and going to social media could invite strict action from the IC. It can go back to the IC or another court, and penal action can be taken against that individual, right? So whether even if you as a complainant or the respondent, you receive a favorable order, do not use that to go out and do not take the order and put it out there. You're still bound by confidentiality. What happens when IC decision is proved wrong in court? Neha Jain is asking, should that IC be dissolved and a new one to be formed? No, not really, unless there is proof that the IC members acted in a malified manner or with bad intention, right? Unless that is proven, there is no need to sort of disband the IC. IC, it's a lower court. It can arrive at a decision which is overturned by a higher court. That is how the natural process of law works in our judicial system. So there is nothing wrong with if an IC's order is overturned, as long as the IC is acted in a bona fide manner. There is no problem, and the IC can continue. So just moving on to some of the questions. There are a lot of questions, and I know I won't be able to take all of the questions, unfortunately. So I'm going to try and cover off as many questions as we can. Surbi is asking, is the forum of the High Court approachable after making an appeal to an IC order with the Labour Court, or a writ against an IC order to be filed directly after an IC order? So there are two ways to go take a matter on appeal, right? From the IC, you can directly approach the High Court, but from the IC, you can also directly, you can first go to the appellate authority, and from the appellate authority, you can go to the High Court. So there are many instances where complainants or respondents have approached the IC, approached the High Court directly after an IC's order. So both options are available, but I would always recommend that you use the options as prescribed in the POSH law, which is basically go to the appellate authority and then go to the High Court thereafter. Somali is asking, referring to previous question already answered by you, if an org has no women employees, then their IC will have to borrow PO and members from another organization. Only the presiding officer can be common, and the other organization has to be your sister organization. It cannot just be any organization. So if it is an affiliate or a sister organization, then you don't have, the organization does not have an appropriate person, either a female employee or a senior female employee. They can ask that presiding officer to be part of their IC as well. So what else? I'm just looking at some of the other cases. Santosh is asking, ideally court should have given directions to IC to investigate the sexual harassment matters through validation of falsified complaints too in the future. Yes, Santosh. Okay, so Khushbu is asking, so we use the word sexual intent so often when it comes to language used. However, one fails to understand the difference between foul language and sexual intent when it comes to sexual intent. In that context, I would like to understand sexual intent. So basically, it is, if the foul language probably does not, again, this case hasn't gone too deep into what kind of foul language is acceptable and what is not. But I would say that any kind of language that sort of question one's parentage brings into sort of aspect, the mother sister kind of abuses, or any other abuse that have any sexual connotation to it, could actually be viewed as sexual harassment by an IC or a court. But any screaming or shouting or using of maybe language that is non-sexual, like maybe idiot or where have you left your brains or what have you, things like that may not be actually maybe inappropriate from the perspective of how to talk to a subordinate, but may not amount to sexual harassment. So the judgment hasn't gone into too much detail on that aspect of what kind of language would amount to sexual harassment or not. But it's an interesting question. I don't know if any other order or judgment has actually gone into that much detail. So I'm just looking at the time. So we have kind of 3 questions. So a lot of people are asking if the labor code is the first appellate authority. Yes, it is. Renuka is saying, which is the best certificate judgments on posh law. I think you'll have to. I don't believe there is one website that gives you all the posh law judgments. Our research team tracks judgments, but then we do that on Manupatra. So you can use Manupatra or any other sort of tool that gives you access to all judgments, but then you will have to specifically research and look for posh law judgments. Sarvat's asking, in case a false complaint is filed, is there any provision for compensation to be given to the respondent by the complainant? Well, look, Sarvat, the law says very clearly that it will be treated exactly as if it were the punishment and penalty would be the same. So it's up to the IC. But yes, if you're going to award compensation to a complainant for an instance of sexual harassment, then you should also award compensation in the event there is a false complaint. So yes, absolutely. So there are lots of comments. Those are just sort of individual comments in respect to what I've responded. So therefore, I'm not going to kind of read them all out because there's a lot. But I'm just kind of trying to scrutinize and see if there's anything that we can pick up and respond to you. If the complainant is not, Somali is asking, the complainant is not an employee and she made a false complaint as per IC, then who penalizes her? Look, the IC has the power of a civil court, so it can provide an order that penalizes the complainant as well. But here's what you must bear in mind. A false complaint can be established only after a separate inquiry has been conducted. So it cannot be determined in the same inquiry which deals with the complaint of sexual harassment. It cannot sort of go into a complaint. You cannot determine that it's a false complaint. The IC will have to separately hear a matter and then conclude that it is a false complaint. Nirupama is asking, in the current work from home scenario, are you hearing of any challenges with IC investigations and with conduct happening from home, which can now be termed as an extended workplace? So Nirupama, actually speaking, even before the order, long before the pandemic happened, actually the POSH law was actually quite clear in that sense. Even though it didn't specifically use the word virtual, it did define the workplace in a wide enough manner such that it was made very clear that even working from home would be treated as an extension of the workplace. So in the current work from home scenario, it continues to be treated as a workplace under the POSH law, just like it would have been previously as well. But here's the thing. The challenges are many, and the cases of sexual harassment that we are seeing are increasing. So so the type of physical harassment, physical sexual harassment that you might have seen in the physical world are no longer obviously there in the COVID world, but the kind of harassment has just changed. There's a lot more of videos, inappropriate videos being forwarded, WhatsApp messages, all of those things are inappropriate comments, asking somebody to adjust the video camera such that the entire body can be seen. So there's just the list goes on and on and on. So the sexual harassment has not stopped. To the contrary, it has increased, but it's just of a different nature right now, right? So Piyush is asking, while the court cannot consider a case with the same amount of facts or evidence, what happens if the IC did not carry out the investigation in an incompetent manner? What happens if the IC did not carry out the investigation in an incompetent manner, or if the witnesses were reportees to the respondent and feared retaliation, right? So if the IC did not carry it out in an incompetent manner, then there's no problem, right? As long as the IC did what it was supposed to do, then there is no difficulty, challenge, or issue, right? The problem is if the IC has not followed the law or has not followed certain principles that are enunciated in the law, right? So K. Singh is asking, can presiding officer be the female director in the company? Mr. Singh or Ms. Singh, I'm not sure from your name. We would not recommend that you keep a director as the presiding officer of the IC. We'd always recommend that you find another senior lady employee to do that job. But if you have nobody else and the female director is the only option, then by all means go ahead and appoint the female director. Otherwise, it would be better to have somebody else instead of somebody who sits on the board of directors of the company. Okay, so I think there's some more questions coming in, but we have actually run out of time with respect to this webinar. So we can take one more question. Can the IC itself conduct the inquiry into a false complaint independent of the sexual harassment inquiry asked by the anonymous attendee? Yes, of course, the IC can definitely conduct the inquiry. It just has to be a separate inquiry, right? And Somali says, as far as I was taught, no compensation to a man. I wouldn't say no compensation to a man, because the law clearly says that it would be the penal provision, the penalty for filing a false complaint is exactly the same as it were for if somebody was guilty of sexual harassment. That's all the law says. The law doesn't say anything else. Therefore, if the IC deems appropriate, then they can also award compensation to the man. I personally don't see a problem with that, but happy to have a debate offline with you on that particular issue. All right, so there are some more questions, but I'm afraid we're pretty much out of time. So thank you all for participating, flooding us with questions. We really enjoyed the interaction, and I hope we have sort of been able to respond to or answer most of the questions that you asked. If you still have further questions, write to us at info@rainmaker.co.in, and we'll respond to you with respect to the questions that you may have, right? So on that note, we are going to sort of close the webinar. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for your, and I look forward to meeting you in future such knowledge sessions. Please do join us then. Thank you.